Listen to me, because what I am about to tell you will shatter everything you think you know about superiority, about strength, about what it means to be truly evolved. Across 17 star systems, the Valorian Elite, the most pompous self-proclaimed masters of the galactic throne, believed they had conquered the universe through their crystalline hard exoskeletons and neural superiority. They were magnificent. They were unstoppable. They were absolutely catastrophically wrong, and it took a human woman with blackened, scarred hands to prove it. A human woman and a dog. Yes, you heard that right. A dog. The stage is set. The war room of the Valorian command station hung suspended in the vacuum of space like a gleaming monument to arrogance. Everything here screamed precision, power, dominion. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent panels that cast everything in an unsettling purple glow. Commander Tavirax stood at the observation portal, his 17-foot frame draped in ceremonial armor that probably cost more than the annual GDP of 17 human nations. His mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his species, a sound like knife blades dancing on glass. He was waiting for her. General Sarah Lune entered the chamber with a limp. Not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because 2 months ago, she had walked into a supernova's radiation field to save her crew. Her hands, once delicate things designed for a life of privilege back on Earth, were now twisted, scarred monuments to survival. The skin was mottled gray and brown, pulled tight across knuckles that looked like they belonged to a granite statue. She could barely curl her fingers, let alone hold a weapon. The Valorian had noted this. They had made jokes about it. Tavirax's laughter filled the chamber, amplified by the acoustic panels. He turned to face her, and his optical sensors, all 8 of them fixed upon her ruined hands with something like contempt mixed with curiosity. It was the gaze of a biologist studying a defective specimen before disposal. General Lune. Welcome back, Tavirax said, his voice modulated through translation algorithms to sound almost pleasant. Almost. Though I must say, your appearance has deteriorated. Tell me, do your people typically fall apart so readily when exposed to basic stellar radiation? I had assumed humans possessed at least minimal self-repair capabilities. Evidently, I overestimated your evolutionary advancement. Around the chamber, other Valorian officers made sounds of agreement. Some produced clicking, wheezing laughs. A few simply nodded with the satisfied air of those who had just witnessed someone else insulted. This was how they operated. Constant, casual degradation. It kept the other species in line. It kept everyone understanding their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Sarah did not smile. She did not look away. She did not surprisingly punch Tavirax directly in his smug, oversized face, which was probably the more impressive feat. I survived, she said simply. That's what matters. My crew survived. Your warship didn't. Want to know how many hands I can use now compared to how many of your officers are still breathing? The math might interest you. Tavirax's mandibles froze mid-click. The other officers fell silent. The tension in the room crystallized into something physical, something you could practically touch. This was dangerous. Sarah knew it. Humans knew it. Probably the decorative plants in the corner knew it. You did not talk back to a Valorian commander. You especially did not talk back while making your superiors look foolish. But then something extraordinary happened. The chamber doors hissed open, and a figure bounded through with more enthusiasm than grace. It was a dog, a genuine Earth dog, specifically a German Shepherd mix named Murphy, though everyone on the vessel called him Apex, a nickname he had earned after saving a colony from a methane explosion by literally throwing himself against the exhaust vent to seal it. The Valorian had never quite understood humanity's obsession with keeping animals aboard a war vessel. To them it was inefficient, sentimental, a waste of resources. But Murphy was not here today to debate interstellar resource allocation. He took one look at Sarah's scarred hands, then he looked at Tavirax, and he walked directly between them. The Apex was old, scarred himself. His left ear had been shredded in combat. A long gash marked his shoulder where a plasma blast had grazed him during the defense of Kepler Station. His fur, once sleek and deep brown, was now mottled with silver, but his eyes, his dark, intelligent eyes, held the kind of weight that only comes from surviving the unsurvivable. Murphy just sat there, between the general and the commander. "That animal," Tavirax began, clearly prepared to issue an order about immediate removal and disposal protocols, but Murphy looked up at him, not aggressively, not submissively, just look. And then, in a move that would later become legendary in military records, the apex pup raised his front left paw, scarred, burned from that same methane explosion, but still functional, and placed it gently on Sarah's thigh. The chamber held its breath. "Were you forged in battle, too?" Sarah asked, her voice surprisingly soft, directed at the commander but really aimed at something deeper. "Or are hands only interesting to you when they're not yours?" Tavirax stared at the dog, stared at the woman, stared at the burned paw pressed against her leg. The bioluminescent lights pulsed overhead, casting everything in shifting purple shadow and sickly light. "Commander," interjected Captain Vex, the only Valorian in the room who had ever shown any actual curiosity toward humanity beyond tactical efficiency. "Perhaps we should review the combat footage from the engagement General Lune participated in. Her tactical decisions may prove instructive." The implication hung there like an asteroid. General Lune did something remarkable, something that may have come from exactly those burned hands and their hard-earned knowledge. Tavirax's mandibles began clicking again, but the rhythm was different, slower, thoughtful. He turned away from the observation portal, away from the stars he believed he owned, and he descended toward the general. Everyone in the chamber tensed, except Murphy. The dog remained perfectly calm, his scarred paw still resting against Sarah's leg, his presence a quiet statement about survival and worth. When Tavirax reached them, he did something unprecedented. He extended one of his own appendages, not his primary weapon's arm, but the secondary sensory limb, and he observed Sarah's burned hands with something that was definitely not contempt. "How long until functionality returns?" he asked. The question was clinical, but there was something else underneath it. Something that might have been respect, or at least the opening move toward it. 6 months, Sarah answered. "Maybe 7. The nerve damage is extensive, but I've already regained 15% of my grip strength. The body adapts." "The body adapts," Tavirax repeated, as if testing the concept. He looked at Murphy's scarred paw. He looked back at Sarah's ravaged hands. "You continue to operate despite the damage." "You operate or you die," Sarah said. "There's not really a middle option in war." Behind them, the observation portal displayed the vastness of space, a universe that suddenly seemed a great deal less certain than it had moments ago. The Valorian had assumed they understood humanity. Clearly they had been wrong, and for a species built on superiority, incorrectness was the most destabilizing concept imaginable. Murphy stood up, shook his scarred body, and walked to the portal. He stared out at the stars as if he owned them, as if he had earned them through fire and sacrifice. And perhaps he had. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems and the distant pulse of the bioluminescent panels. In that silence, something shifted. In that silence, the beginning of understanding took root. General Sarah Lune, with her burned and scarred hands, stood beside the apex pup, and together they looked out at an infinite universe that would never quite see the Valorian Elite the same way again. 3 weeks later, the tactical briefing room smelled like ozone and something else Sarah could not quite identify. Probably Valorian sweat, assuming they sweated. She had stopped trying to categorize their biology about 6 months ago. It was easier to just accept that they were bizarre and move forward. Commander Tavirax stood before a holographic display showing the Krell aggregate's fleet movements. The Krell were not the enemy. Well, technically they were not anyone's friends either, but in the grand tradition of the galaxy's power players, you could make temporary alliances with monsters if it meant preventing worse monsters from consuming everything. The display shifted. Red markers bloomed across the map like infection spreading through a wound. 37 new Krell vessels had appeared at the threshold, that invisible line in space where the peaceful traders became either cargo or corpses, depending on which faction reached them first. We have 3 hours before the Krell intercept the merchant convoy, Captain Vex announced. Her mandibles clicked with barely restrained irritation. Our fastest interceptor can reach them in 5 hours. We will lose at least 15 civilian transports. Tavirax turned to face the gathered officers. His 8 eyes rotated independently as he processed multiple data streams simultaneously. His secondary appendages gestured at the hologram, manipulating the display with uncomfortable grace. We accept the losses, Tavirax said flatly. The math is simple, 15 transports against 37 Krell warships. The probability of mission success is negligible. We preserve our forces and— No? Everyone turned. Sarah Lune stood at the back of the briefing room, her burned hands clasped before her. Murphy sat beside her, his scarred body perfectly still, but his eyes tracked every movement in the chamber. Absolutely not, Sarah continued. We have the Valkyrie-class strikers. We have the plasma arrays. We have 3 things you do not. We have speed. We have a commander who will not sacrifice civilians for statistics. And we have Murphy. Captain Vex made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been her preparing to vomit. It was difficult to tell with her species. You propose to send fewer weapon systems against a superior force? Tavirax's tone suggested he was genuinely curious rather than dismissive. That was new, progress, in its way. Explain your tactical reasoning, General. Sarah stepped forward. Each step sent jolts of pain through her healing legs, but she did not show it. You did not limp in front of the Valorian unless you were trying to appear weak. The Krell fight by the numbers, she said, moving to the holographic display. With her burned right hand she gestured toward the enemy formations. The gesture was awkward, but functional. They calculate probability matrices. They predict your moves because they have predicted 1,000 moves from 1,000 species. But humans, we are unpredictable. We break their algorithms because we do not always behave logically. Tavirax's primary eyes narrowed. That is not a strategy. That is chaos. That is exactly what you are afraid of, Sarah replied, because for the first time in your tactical simulations, you cannot calculate our behavior with certainty. We will take the Valkyrie-class strikers, we will hit their left flank at .033 on the spatial grid, and we will scatter their formation before they can form a proper assault wedge. The angle is inefficient, another Valorian officer protested. A younger one, probably never actually fought anything that fought back. The approach vector will expose your vessels to a crossfire that will be less devastating than a full frontal engagement, Sarah interrupted. Yes, I know. We accept the risk. Calculated risk is how humans survive things that should kill us. Murphy suddenly stood up. He walked directly to the holographic display and placed his scarred paw on the table beneath it, right where Sarah had indicated. His timing was absolutely, perfectly synchronized with her words. It was not accidental. The dog had learned to read human tactical discussions years ago. The gesture was simple, primal, a physical placement of intention and commitment. It made approximately 0 sense from a mathematical standpoint. It made absolute, perfect sense from every other standpoint. Captain Vex made that uncertain sound again. This time it was definitely a laugh. I will accompany the General, Vex announced. If humans and one Kani are willing to throw themselves at superior odds, then at least one Valorian will have the clarity to confirm whether they are brilliant or simply insane. Tavirax processed this for approximately 4 seconds. His eye patterns shifted through colors that had no names in any human language. Finally he spoke. Deploy the Valkyrie-class strikers. Authorize the plasma arrays. And, he paused, an unprecedented hesitation, and send the Apex Pup in the lead fighter. If humans break their own tactical rules through unpredictability, then having a creature with no formal training leading the assault is fitting. The briefing room erupted into barely controlled chaos. Some officers were gesturing in what might have been approval. Others were making sounds of protest. Captain Vex simply nodded, as if this was exactly the kind of magnificent disaster she had been waiting for her entire career. Sarah did not celebrate. She did not smile. She simply looked at her burned hands, flexed her scarred fingers, and felt the familiar ache that meant they were healing, still hurting, still functional. The battle. The Valkyrie-class strikers were beautiful in the way that weapons of war were beautiful. They were sleek, predatory things designed by humans who had spent 1,000 years learning how to hurt each other across increasingly distant horizons. Murphy sat in the lead fighter's observation turret, his scarred paw pressed against the reinforced viewport. Behind him 6 other human pilots and 3 Valorian weapons specialists prepared for something that had never existed in the history of either species. A joint combat operation, where humans were not following Valorian orders, and Valorian were following human instinct. Sarah's voice crackled through the communications array. "All wings, this is command. We are going in hot and fast. No formations. No synchronization. Just chaos and commitment. Go." The strikers launched like arrows fired at the moon. The Krell formation was exactly where the tactical predictions said it would be. Orderly, arranged, mathematically perfect, which meant it was already obsolete before the first human fighter reached engagement distance. Murphy did not follow the approach vector Sarah had outlined. He flew through it, across it, and perpendicular to it. The other human pilots, used to unpredictability because humanity had basically invented it, adapted instantly. The Valorian weapons specialists tried to follow the logic and then gave up, simply maintaining tactical fire support as the situation demanded. The first Krell interceptor tried to predict where Murphy's fighter would be in 0.03 seconds. The Apex Pips fighter was somewhere else entirely, and its plasma cannon tore through the Krell vessel's port nacelle before the alien pilots could even register the trajectory. Explosions bloomed across the void. Beautiful. Terrible, absolutely effective. Sarah watched from the command station as the battle developed across multiple screens. She had burned her hands, saving her crew. She was about to watch that decision validated or destroyed in the next 15 minutes. The math suggested destruction. The calculations said the Krell would adapt, overwhelm and consume them all. The math was wrong. Because humans did not fight like the galaxy expected, they fought like something feral. Something desperate, something that had evolved in an environment where yesterday's solutions did not work for today's problems. So you learned to invent new ones. Or you died. Murphy's fighter pulled up sharply, his velocity increasing despite it being physically counterintuitive. The plasma cannon spoke again, and again. The Krell formation began to crack, to fragment, to lose its mathematical cohesion. "They are falling back," Captain Vex reported, her voice carrying something that might have been excitement. "The left flank is collapsing. The Krell they are retreating." Sarah did not allow herself to breathe until the last Krell vessel had passed beyond effective weapon range. Then she permitted herself exactly one small smile. Murphy's fighter banked toward the merchant convoy, scanning for survivors, assessing damage. The Apex pup had done it, had led the charge, had broken the formation through nothing more or less than pure unpredictability. The aftermath. Tavirax stood before Sarah again, 3 hours later. This time the chamber was different. The lighting had shifted to a more neutral white. The atmosphere felt less hostile, more collaborative. The commander's mandibles were still, his eyes calm as they observed the general. "You broke their algorithm," Tavirax said simply. "The Krell have fought 17 different species. They have combat data from 43,000 simulated engagements. Yet your unpredictability created a situation they could not model. Humans have fought each other for 10,000 years without any particular improvement in the methods," Sarah replied. "We have not had the luxury of perfecting a single tactical doctrine. We have had to invent new ones constantly, because there was always someone inventing new ways to kill us. It makes us adaptable. It makes us dangerous. It makes us useful. It makes you alive," Tavirax corrected. There was something in his voice that had not been there before. Respect, perhaps. Or at least the Valorian equivalent of it. "The merchant convoy will arrive safely. 12,000 civilians will survive because you chose calculated risk over comfortable certainty." Murphy entered the chamber. The dog was limping slightly more than usual. One of his burns had reopened during the combat. a small price for the victory he had helped achieve. He walked directly to Sarah and rested his scarred head against her burned hands. The image was not lost on anyone in the chamber. Two beings bearing the marks of their sacrifices, standing together. The Krell will tell their allies about this engagement, Tavirax continued. They will describe the humans. They will describe the apex pup. They will describe two Valorian working alongside creatures they once considered inferior. The galactic perception will shift. Perhaps not immediately, perhaps not obviously, but it will shift. Sarah looked at her scarred hands. She flexed her fingers, feeling the pain and the capability existing together in the same flesh. We all bear our battles, she said quietly. Some of us just wear the scars on our skin instead of pretending they are not there. Tavirax made an unusual gesture with his secondary appendage. It took Sarah a moment to recognize it as a Valorian gesture of acknowledgement, of alliance, of something that might eventually become friendship, given enough time and enough shared survival. Murphy's tail wagged slowly. The dog understood what was happening. The galaxy was beginning to understand that strength was not measured in exoskeleton thickness or number of optical sensors. Strength was measured in what you could survive and still have the courage to do it again. The observation portal displayed the stars beyond, still infinite, still vast, still full of mysteries and dangers. But now, sailing through them, were ships bearing humans and Valorian together. A general with burned hands and an apex pup with scarred fur, proving that evolution was not about perfection. It was about adaptation. It was about survival. It was about knowing that the greatest victories came not from perfect calculation, but from the willingness to burn yourself and keep fighting anyway. The universe was beginning to learn this lesson. It would take a very long time. Some species would never learn it. But out here, in the darkness between stars, that lesson was becoming legend. And legends, once started, were very difficult to stop.